and getting him to admit that they have loaned huge amounts of money to foreign central banks. He didn't know how much, he wouldn't say what banks, and he had no idea what those foreign central banks did with the money to which the American Federal Reserve loaned them. Does any of that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me, but I'm delighted with this shift in attitude, because it's good to have somebody like Dennis on our side. You know, I've worked hard with him on foreign policy and the wars that are going on, and he's independent-minded and will stand up against his party. And Alan Grayson is a freshman. He's very determined and very bright, and he does ask these very good questions. But it used to be that I would ask these questions for a few years, you know, a dozen or two or a lot more, and it would be totally ignored. But now, even Bill Posey the other day followed up and had some good questions with Bernanke. So it's not, I'm not totally alone anymore, and it's bipartisan, because this issue of transparency and honesty and openness is a bipartisan issue. We don't have an entire agreement on exactly what we'll do afterwards, but we are agreeing that the American people deserve to know what's going on, and if there are shenanigans. And even in the Senate side, you know, Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a socialist, he's with us on this issue because he sees that it subsidizes big corporations, and even a good socialist doesn't like to see Goldman Sachs being bailed out. So when we can find allies like that, we should work with them and bring the truth to light.
Before I let you go, prediction. Will H.R. 1207, your monumental bill, which started out with just you and now has 277 co-sponsors, pass the House and eventually make its way to the Senate floor?
Not as an isolated bill. I don't predict that, because Pelosi, I don't think, would permit that to come up. Barney Frank is not in favor of that, or they would have had it already up. But that doesn't mean that the bill or the thrust of the bill might not be incorporated into something else. And I think the biggest job I have is to make sure, if they put it into something else, because I think they're feeling the political heat and they know they have to do something. But my job is to make sure that it doesn't get watered down, so that in essence 1207 does get passed, even though it won't be passed as an isolated bill.
Congressman Paul, always a pleasure. Thanks very much. Until next week on Freedom Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Congressman Alan Grayson of Florida's questioning of Chairman Bernanke is absolutely priceless. And it went on for about 15 minutes, but we've edited it down for you. We're going to go to my friends Peter and Andrew Schiff to talk about this. But before we do that, I want you to take a look at Congressman Grayson, a member of the House Financial Services Committee, interrogating Federal Reserve Board Chairman Ben Bernanke. Listen to the question, and you won't believe the answer.
Many foreign banks are short dollars, and so they come into our markets looking for dollars and drive up interest rates and create volatility in our markets. What we have done is, with a number of major central banks, like European Central Bank, for example, we swap our currency, dollars, for their currency, euros. They take the dollars, lend it out to the banks in their jurisdiction. That helps bring down interest rates in the global market for dollars. And meanwhile, we're not lending to those banks. We're lending to the central bank. The central bank is responsible for repaying us.
So who got the money?
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
$500 billion, and you don't know who got the money?
The loans go to the central banks, and they then put them out to their institutions to try to bring down short-term interest rates in dollar markets around the world.
Well, let's start with which central banks got the money.
There's 14 of them, which are listed I'm sure they're listed in here somewhere.
All right. So who actually made that decision to hand out $1 trillion that way, $500 billion? Who made that decision?
The Federal Open Market Committee.
Okay. And was it done at one time or in a series of meetings?
A series of meetings.
And under what legal authority?
We have a long-standing legal authority to do swaps with other central banks. It's not an emergency authority of any kind.
Anything specific about it?
Do you know my counsel says Section 14 of the Federal Reserve Act.
All right. We actually looked at one of the arrangements, and one of the arrangements is $9 billion for New Zealand. That works out to $3,000 for every single person who lives in New Zealand. Seriously, wouldn't it have been better to extend that kind of credit to Americans rather than New Zealanders?
It's not costing Americans anything. We're getting interest back, and it comes back. It's not at the cost of any American credit. We are extending credit to Americans.
Well, wouldn't it necessarily affect the credit markets if you extend $500 billion in credit to anybody?
We are lending to all U.S. Financial institutions in exactly the same way.
That, my friends, was a liberal Democratic congressman from Florida with the chairman of the Federal Reserve on the hot seat, hearing questions he didn't want to hear and giving answers which are almost unbelievable. Joining me now is Freedom Watch regular Peter Schiff, who is the chair of Euro-Pacific Capital, and here in the studio with me, Andrew Schiff. Peter, welcome back to Freedom Watch. Andrew, it's nice to meet you, and I'm glad that you're here. Peter, to you first. Were you surprised or were you a little pleased to see Ben Bernanke squirm like that?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. I've known Alan Grayson for over 10 years. He's a smart guy. He's a shrewd investor. And despite being a liberal Democrat, he's very astute. He's probably one of the smartest members of Congress. He's probably one of the only guys in there that understands, these financial statements and balance sheets. I don't know why he decided to run for Congress. I actually contributed to his campaign. I don't support everything he's done. I've argued with him over his support of cap and trade and over his support for paid family leave. But on balance, hopefully he'll be able to do a lot more good in the Congress than bad, because he does have these liberal bleeding heart type tendencies, and maybe that has to do with some of the guilt over how successful he's been in his private life.
Andrew, isn't it almost inconceivable that the chairman of the Federal Reserve would say we've loaned $500 million, we're not going to tell you the banks that it went to, and we have no idea what those banks did with it? Doesn't that really open up the Federal Reserve almost to become a mini government on its own, conducting its own foreign policy with countries that it won't even identify?
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, they are a government on its own. I mean, originally they were designed to be somewhat insulated from government, which is why the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. Although any illusion that they're operating on their own should be discounted, because clearly the coordination between the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve is hand in glove. So I guess you can look at it at the Federal Reserve as an extension of federal power by non-statutory means. I mean, they just work with the Federal Reserve and use their powers, which no one really quite understands, to do whatever they want to do. Now, in terms of loaning the money out, I mean, $500 billion, it's kind of a testament to, how little regard that people have for money. I mean, these figures that we're seeing now are comical. They're nonsensical. They're the kind of numbers that no one would have seen or even imagined 10 years ago. But to them, $500 billion is, a day's cipher in the ledger books.
The interesting thing is when he said, well, we loaned all this money to New Zealand, but it didn't matter. We're loaning money to everybody, right, as if credit is limitless, that there's an infinite amount of it. There's enough for everybody, that anybody who wants money can get it from the Federal Reserve.
But in his way of thinking, because of the powers that he has, and with utter disregard for the consequences, credit is limitless, because he'll just print or buy or sell or acquire whatever he needs to get out there in the market.
Precisely. And, when Alan Grayson questions his legal authority, I don't think there's any legal authority for what the government is doing, nor do I believe that Ben Bernanke even bothered to think whether or not he had the legal authority to do what he does. He just does it.
I think, Peter, and I want Andrew to weigh in on this as well, that they're feeling some heat from the fact that they hired some professional PR firm which formerly worked for Republicans, from the fact that Ben Bernanke himself conducted this town hall meeting, which I thought was a disaster. I mean, he's not the most appealing representative even of this bizarre theory of the economy. I think they're worried that the bill to audit the Fed might actually become law, and they're trying to head it off at the pass, don't you?
First of course, they're worried, and they're trying to raise the issue that, well, you don't want to compromise our independence, as if there's any independence left to compromise. This whole thing is a charade, and they don't want to compromise their independence. They're not saying we want to have control over the Fed. They're just saying we want to know what they're doing. We want to see what they're actually doing. I don't see how that compromises their independence, and believe me, there is no independence left to compromise.
His term, Bernanke's term, as chair is about to expire.
Next year.
Isn't he going to do everything in his power